Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm Kelsey McAllister, and I am a student partner here at the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation. And I am here with Dr. Kelly Crace today from the Wellness Center. He is an Associate Vice President for Health and Wellness and the Director of the Center for Mindfulness and Authentic Excellence. So, just based on what I know that you also teach a few courses, you lead workshops for different student organizations, all kind of centered around this idea of authentic excellence and mental well-being. So I'm really glad to have you here and kind of pick your brain for a few minutes on the kind of options we have on campus, first of all, for just student well-being, but also what you've seen in all your time working here and working with students. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Kelsey. It's good being here.
Awesome. I was wondering if right off the bat you could kind of get into a little bit about what this authentic excellence is and how you see it in William & Mary.
Happy to, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to have a conversation with you today. The Authentic Excellence Initiative kind of derived from my life's work as a psychologist in the area of flourishing. For the past 35 years, we were studying and researching individuals that were going through important life transitions. And as they were going through these life transitions, what did people do that moved more into a state of flourishing through those life transitions? Because transitions are hard. It's change. Change is hard. Even the most positive of changes involves leaving something that's very familiar, which can be felt as loss, and heading towards something that's uncertain, which can be felt as worry or fear or just stress. So we're really interested in studying individuals as to what happened during those life transitions that either they described as they were flourishing during those times, or they were languishing, or just kind of staying okay but not at their optimal. We defined flourishing in our research as a consistent, not a perfect, but a consistent level of productivity and fulfillment and resilience. So they found themselves, those that were describing themselves as flourishing, they found that they were doing good work in the things that mattered to them, but they were also finding fulfillment and meaning in that work. And they were able to be resilient through the hardness and harshness and sometimes unfairness of the world around that work. That's what we were really fascinated by. As we were studying these individuals, it was interesting to see that the terminology that they would use and just how they would think about what was their mindset? In other words, how were they focusing their mind? What was their intention? And individuals that struggled with flourishing or at times were languishing during important life transitions, the terminology of what they were seeking and what they were looking for was very different than when they were flourishing. And for instance, individuals that were languishing through a transition or really struggling through one, the two words that were used the most often was how hard things were and that they were chasing happiness. So they were chasing relief from the hardness, and they were also chasing happiness. In other words, they were feeling a lack of that emotion, so they were chasing it. Whereas we found that people that flourished were people when they were flourishing, sometimes these same individuals, when they were flourishing, the terms hard and happy never really entered their narrative, never really entered their terminology. They focused on words such as meaning. And hard just was. If they were doing something that was meaningful, hard was just an accepted part of it. It wasn't something they necessarily mourned or found themselves trying to get relief from. And instead of terms like happiness, they focused more on meaning. And what we found is that the more we chase happiness, the more we chase relief, actually the more we struggle. As to comparison, when we chase meaning, when we are looking for engagement with meaning, we actually experience this kind of quiet level of fulfillment and a little bit of a quiet level of joy. In fact, what we found the tipping point to be is people that were flourishing, they would describe kind of this very quiet fulfillment that they had in their life, that despite the hardness and even sometimes despite the hurtfulness or mourning or grief that they were going through, that they found themselves engaged in things that mattered to them, and that brought a peace. It brought a fulfillment to them. Then on days when the world would kind of cooperate with them, it would tip over from fulfillment to joy. And it wasn't like just an exuberant joy, but it was just it was an emotion that came from it, like a disposition that came to it that just felt a little better than fulfillment. But the bottom line, the real baseline for them was fulfillment. And that was their intention. Their intention every day was to step into something that was meaningful to them and engage in that. And most importantly, they defined their success and their worth by the engagement, not by the experience, not by the outcome. The experience and the outcome was just icing on the cake if it was good, and if it was hurtful, they just focused on self-care. So the Authentic Excellence Initiative, it's a long way of saying that we're trying to move people from this kind of fear-based excellence model where you're constantly chasing certain outcomes, defining your worth by outcomes that are uncertain in your life. And because of that uncertainty, that's why we feel fear. And so constantly trying to control that fear or manage that and chasing these outcomes and chasing a feeling, which is an emotional state. Happiness is an emotional state that can be affected by 100 different variables in a day, including how much water you have in your system. So many things can affect that. Meaning is different. Meaning is deeper. And so there was two kind of transitions. Is one, instead of chasing an emotional state, they were seeking fulfillment. And they defined that fulfillment by simply the engagement in things that matter to me. And we were just fascinated by those results.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and as we were learning from these individuals across all generations and across all cultures, we found ourselves interested in, how did you learn this? Like, how did you find this? And can you train it? And what we learned is there's no natural born flourishers. They weren't born this way. They worked at it. They were very intentional about it. And they respected the fact that they had to be intentional and mindful about it, because our world doesn't really foster that kind of thinking. And our own neurology doesn't really foster it. And so because of that, they just were committed to a constant mindfulness of every day, starting their day with, even though human beings are most naturally motivated by fear and comfort, they were very intentional about starting their day with what really matters to me today. And of those things, what matters most. So they wouldn't just crystallize what mattered, they would then prioritize it.
Right.
And they would engage in that, but most importantly, they defined their worth and the success by that, rather than what happened. It was by their engagement.
That's so, it's, first of all, this is like the icing on the cake for me right now, because when I had Professor Podkay come in here, who wrote a book about joy, this is exactly what he's talking about, is that joy it doesn't need to be like this exuberant joy, but it's these small moments that, like when the tribe wins a football game, these small things that you can point to and say, yeah, I felt joy there. And so it kind of made me reconceptualize my whole question in my project of, how do we find happiness? And maybe it's not so much that, it's more so how can we experience more joyful events and having those small things along the way? Because you're right when you say, like the question, are you happy? And then someone kind of goes, oh, like, I don't know. And it's because there's probably this fear of this chasing for happiness, because it's so abstract and out there. And so it makes a lot of sense. And it makes sense that you're saying with the gratitude. I mean, I feel like every therapist says, start a gratitude journal. And you just go, I'll do it eventually. Right. But then you hear all these stories of people who do. And it's amazing that just as simple as taking those 5 minutes in the beginning of your day to think about what you're grateful for. And it's crazy to me. But every time I hear it again, it just reinforces what everyone's saying. But I kind of wanted to ask a question. Yeah. So in terms of the finding the meaning, right, or feeling fulfilled because you have this meaning, what would you say to maybe a student who then comes up to you and says, okay, well, how do I find, that meaning, or how do I find that fulfillment? Are there options on campus to kind of help me try to navigate what would make me feel fulfilled in that regard?
There's so many different ways, both informally and formally. That's part of what the Center for Mindfulness and Authentic Excellence is about, is to help support individuals navigating that course of finding meaning for themselves. But there's also informal ways, and that was really one of the important additional things that we found is individuals don't do this mindfulness work. They don't do this intentionality in a vacuum of just themselves. There's a social connection to this. There's a belonging context to this that is so important. And that because we are a purposeful relational species. So yes, for us to feel joy and meaning, we have to connect to our sense of purpose. But we also have to look and see, how does my purpose impact you, and how does your purpose impact me? There's a relational piece to that that really matters. And so we want individuals to come in and start thinking, being introspective, wondering what matters to me. One of the ways we do that is we help them clarify their values, but we also move them to a point of a paradigm shift. Instead of what my values are, instead start thinking about what is my relationship with my values. In other words, instead of what my values are, how are my values alive? How would I know if I followed you around for a month, would I be able to tell just from your behavior what matters to you? If you couldn't tell me what mattered to you, I would learn about, one, what's right to you, what matters to you because you're engaged in it, but I also would learn how you manage fear from that as well, because that's what you'll feel every day. Our biggest effort is to help people clarify that. We have various assessment tools and various conversations and workshops that are designed to help people clarify for themselves what gives me meaning, what gives me a sense of purpose, what gives me a sense of fulfillment, and being able to help them then test that out and try that out, because values, it's a cliche, but it's true. Values are caught, not taught. You can tell me all the time what matters to you, but what I'll remember is what I see in your behavior. Right. And so it's how do we engage what says matters to us into our behavior and engage in that. And we even learned, this was really fascinating for us, we learned that when we're flourishing and people that consistently are very intentional about flourishing, they even do gratitude journals differently. Gratitude journals are wonderful things. I highly recommend them. But the nature of gratitude journals, a lot of times people will spend writing gratitude journals and they start drifting into being grateful for things that have happened to me, grateful for experiences or outcomes or things that have happened. When you look at people that are intentional about their flourishing, that gratitude journal shifts. It includes that. It includes being grateful for things that have happened. But there's also this deep appreciation and value for them stepping in and engaging things that matter. So they take a moment at the end of every day and take a moment and just appreciate where they courageously engaged in things that matter to them. So there's this appreciation and gratitude for the world around them, but there's an appreciation and gratitude for their courage in stepping into things that mattered and defining themselves from that. Those small, I love how you said the small moments of joy, the whispers of joy, and being attuned to that. This morning I was coming into the office and I saw a dear colleague, a faculty member that I hadn't seen in a long time. And he was too far away. He was out of earshot, so I couldn't yell at him.
It's like that awkward
to get his attention. But what I did do is it brought me back to memories of our relationship together and our collaborations together. And it just filled me with a sense in that moment of real meaning and value of him and what he portrays as an individual and what I saw in his behavior. And in that appreciation of him and our time together, it left me with a feeling of joy. It left me with a feeling of meaning that just, there was a little more of a pep to my step as I was walking into the office.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, even with what you were saying about the offerings that you guys have at the Wellness Center, I even know, so obviously the reason this question came to my head was the Happiness Lab podcast and Laura Santos at Yale. And if you take her course that she has now put on an online platform, one of the first homework assignments is to take kind of a value assessment quiz. Yeah. And then based on the findings, the top 5 values that it says that it sees you having, you are supposed to create something for every day of the week and do something that would kind of go to push that value forward. So, if it was gratitude, it'd be, okay, well, one time this week, write a note to someone that you're grateful for and say why. And it is because you have to be intentional about your values. Like what you're saying, it's one thing for you to believe and genuinely believe that that's your value, which is amazing. But it's another thing not only to act on it, but also it will make you feel more fulfilled when you have that meaning. I mean, I'm basically just reiterating what you're saying, but it just makes so much sense when you put it out in the actual world. So I'm really grateful that you said that. And I guess kind of one thing that, because what I was talking about with Professor Simon as well is, obviously the first step to choosing, to getting, not even just getting help, but just to doing something good for yourself, the first step always seems to be the hardest. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if if a student is listening to this, what is one offering, this might be really hard, but one thing that you really wish students would take more advantage of, or you just think is a great first starting place for someone who wants to leap into this journey, but it just feels a little too overwhelming and there's too many offerings. So what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the engagement piece is so important, but engagement at just a very small level. Even when feeling overwhelmed and when feeling can't, what can they do? What can they step in that they think, and they don't have to know. They can guess of, I think this might be something meaningful. That's one of the reasons why we really proposed this model of integrative wellness. The vision of integrative wellness is recognizing the holistic, very personal, self-defining, self-determining level of understanding what wellness means to you. For some people, that's a very individualized thing. For other people, it's a very collective thing. But it's about tuning in. The noise of the world is so loud these days, and the pace of the world and the pressure of the world. There will always be things chirping at us that we should be doing this or should be doing that. And one of the things I always encourage people to do is take a moment, start this off by taking a moment and truly being in that present moment. That if I decide I am going to take a break and be with my friend, that I'm going to truly be with that friend, that I am going to take a break and go get a cup of coffee or tea, that I'm truly absorbed and attentive and mindful with that beverage that I love, or with the person that I love, or with this concept that I'm learning that I love learning about, or just engaged in activity. All of the departments of health and wellness have an opportunity for expression of wellness, of things that matter to you, whether you're going to campus rec or campus recreation, or going into the counseling center or the health center to take care of yourself. We have a lot more students that are coming to the health center for wellness checkups now instead of waiting for something to be wrong. Or going into yoga or mindfulness or art therapy. There's so many different things that you can do. And one of the things that we did to try to help students is created that William and Mary Wellness app. So if you just download that app, and if you could look at that and be able to say, what's one thing that piques my interest today? But the first part of that is just tuning in, right. Tuning out the noise of the world and giving yourself, and if that means a minute, if that means sitting on a park bench and just sitting and being in that moment, your wisdom will come up with ways to steer you toward meaning. The wisdom is there. It's already there. It's just about moving some of the things aside. Our work within integrative wellness, and truly I believe it's the work of every department and every office, every academic department, every supportive department on campus, is really to help people understand things more deeply, understand themselves more deeply, and in that, what are you learning about yourself in terms of what matters? So really it's about that engagement for a moment and then taking that and leading that to some form of action. And then you just allow that to say, how did that go today? There's a difference between purpose and meaning. Purpose is motivational. Meaning is reflective. So I have to take a moment when I actually go and engage in something that I think will be meaningful to actually reflect on how did that go today? What meaning did that have for me? And that's how we start learning that. And we're constantly evolving. So what's meaningful for me today may be something different next year.
Right.
And we have to tune into that all the time.
I mean, what I'm hearing with all of this is just an act of intentionality, right? Like
yes.
Being there, being present. If you're intentional about your flourishing, then that's where it seems like the good things start happening. Or not even the outcomes, but, it's just a shift in the way that we can view what is happening to us in a beneficial and a flourishing way.
Yeah, if you look at it from, sometimes it feels too much to think about what do I need to change in my life, right. Or what do I need to do better in my life. And that's what a lot of people think around personal development is it feels like a heavy lift, when really the heart of our vision of integrated wellness and the Authentic Excellence program is this is not about changing you, it's getting you to be more deeply you. How do you become more deeply you with things that matter? And that's something that people are genuinely, usually intrigued by and usually have an interest in trying on, even if it's for a minute of,
right.
How do we get you to be a little more deeply you for a couple minutes today? And they usually are all for that.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, awesome. There's one more question. And I typically, I'll tell you what it usually is, but I'm going to change it for you. So it typically is what makes you happy, because how can we do a happiness or a joy or whatever this podcast is going to turn into now? How can we do that without asking about what it makes the people here happy? So I'm going to change that a little bit.
Please.
Today, what is your meaning? What is meaningful to you? And yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Today has been a day that has had a lot of variability to it. But one of the things that I think I felt the deepest form of meaning and fulfillment, aside from spending this time with you and us having a good conversation around these issues, which is deeply meaningful to me. But I gain great meaning from the honor that individuals that come to me in a place of suffering and trust me and would honor me with the opportunity to teach them about themselves, teach me about themselves in that moment of suffering, has great meaning for me, because it's a level of trust and a level of honor that they are gifting me, because I've not earned their trust yet. For some people, it's the first time I'm meeting them, and yet they courageously step into that room and open up about themselves and teach me about themselves. And in teaching me about themselves, I learn too, not only about them, but I learn about me. Just that dynamic of trust during a time of suffering is, it's just extraordinarily, deeply meaningful to me. And even though I mourn the fact of seeing them suffering in that moment, I just find great honor and meaning in the fact that they trust me enough to share that with me.
That's amazing, and I'm not surprised that they do. You are one of the brightest lights genuinely on this campus. So I thank you. I know you're so busy, and I'm so grateful that you came, shared a little time, and shared a lot of your wisdom with us. And I'm excited to see, where I can take this information for learning how we can promote well-being, happiness, or I might shift that a little bit based on what I found. But thank you so much, Dr. Crace. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelsey. It's my honor. Thank you.